This episode is being brought to you in part by our sponsor, Inato. Inato's entirely free platform is empowering community-based research sites all around the globe with access and unheard of levels of visibility to the right top clinical trials. You can see open or upcoming trials as far as a year in advance with tools and features to help you focus on trials that are the best fit for your site and for your patients. Look, I can tell you it's very challenging to find clinical trial opportunities as a site, and it's even more important to make sure that when you do find those opportunities, you're choosing the right ones. That's where Inato comes in. Inato's advocates help you showcase for sponsors your diverse patient populations, community engagement efforts, diverse staff, and really all the things that help make your site unique. So sign up today. It only takes 2 minutes. Head on over to inato.com. That is inato.com. This episode is also being brought to you in part by Veeva. Veeva connects patients, sites, and sponsors on a single technology ecosystem to make clinical trials easier and faster. Look, if you've paid any attention to my content, you know that we love Veeva SiteVault. We've moved all of our studies over to SiteVault and now utilizing electronic signatures. It's amazing the efficiencies you can find when you're not having to chase down physicians to sign all kinds of documents. Really, it's been a huge game changer for us as a site. At this point, more than 4,500 sites are using SiteVault. Over 400 industry sponsors are also using Veeva clinical applications. In fact, 65% of all global clinical trials are being run on Veeva. That is an insane amount of trials. The best part is it's completely free to use. So if you're a site, there's really no better option in terms of managing your regulatory documents. It's easy, it's free. To learn more, head on over to sites.veeva.com today. That is sites.veeva.com. Hello and welcome to the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. Our guest this week is Thomas Peterson. Thomas has been in healthcare for about 17 years now, with a vast majority of that experience being in the clinical trial space. He served in many capacities, including a research assistant, study coordinator, senior study coordinator, CRA, and now senior CRA. He also founded his own consulting company to assist anyone in the clinical research space that needs guidance. Thomas works within oncology, neuro-oncology, rare disease, infectious disease, as well as pediatrics. This was a really fun conversation. This week we discussed the shift from CRC to CRA, humanity in clinical trials, the downstream effects of innovation in the industry, and so much more. So without further ado, Thomas Peterson. All right, this week we welcome Thomas Peterson. How's it going, man?
Good, Brad. I think it's been a long time coming that we finally get to meet. You know, we talk so much through LinkedIn these days that actually getting a chance to have some one-on-one time, man, this is much overdue, I think.
Yeah, it's really cool. And something I've experienced quite a bit is just a lot of chatter, and I say chatter like it's a bad thing, but just a lot of community and discussion on LinkedIn. I think it's really cool, and it is fun when people that gone back and forth with or had extensive conversations with, and then finally get to actually have a real human conversation, right? I mean, it's nice.
Most definitely is, yes.
Where are you calling in from?
So I am south of Chicago in the Peoria, Illinois area. Do you know where Peoria is?
I don't. I've driven to Chicago before. It was a long time ago, and I assume I had to drive through Peoria.
I'd say you're missing out, but Peoria is probably 300,000 people. I mean, it's not huge, but it's a great little city. I love it here. So it works. It works for me. And where are you based out of, Brad?
So I'm in Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City. Okay. All right. Not too far away from me.
I live half an hour or so south of Oklahoma City, so I'm in the area. So I'm in the suburbs as well, I guess, so to speak.
Nice, very nice. All right.
I'm going to just open up like we do with every show. I'm always kind of curious to hear people's backgrounds, what brought them into the clinical trial space. I think it's always fun to kind of be enlightening. As we know, there people come with all kinds of random backgrounds.
Yeah.
Most oftentimes sort of unintentionally working in the clinical trial space. So if you would, just, tell us a bit about your backstory and your sort of clinical trial origins, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it, though. I mean, it seems like anybody in clinical research these days, if you would have asked them in their undergrad, for example, where you see yourself in 10 years, research was not on that list. I've been working in healthcare now for, I'd say, cumulatively about 18 years. Started off working as a paramedic for the state of Illinois, specifically at regional hospital that we work with down here. From there, went over to dialysis, worked as a dialysis technician, which credit to those people, man, that work is brutal hard. And then honestly, from there, I moved out of the area and went over to a renal transplant research company. It was really the history, starts there with my clinical trials. I mean, I really didn't know what to expect walking into it, but, I was a coordinator for 5-6 years, and then jumped from the study coordinator side over to the CRA side with quintiles back when they were actually quintiles, not IQVIA or quintiles or IMS or whatever they were when they took coordinators and they basically molded them into CRAs. So I've been a CRA now for almost 9 years now, and I've loved every minute of it. So I do contract work, consulting work, auditing work. I've definitely got my share of work right now, but I always love kind of giving the CRO's perspective on things. I think that there's this unfortunate stigma out there about CROs, which, some of it is warranted, truth be told. But there's some of the things that I think that it's good for sites to recognize that there's a lot more going on internally than they realize. And I think that's hopefully where, our kind of conversation today will kind of steer our conversation into, I think.
Yeah. And, I mean, first of all, I certainly believe that. I'm definitely guilty of sort of oversimplifying the perspective sometimes from the site side when I'm fully aware that it's extremely complicated and certainly more nuanced than you can sometimes put in a short LinkedIn post.
I mean, no matter what position you hold, you always, are in that gray area of saying, okay, well, I think there's more to it, but from what I can see and what I'm told, this is all I've got to work with. So I think that drives conversation, and I think that's what's important. I think that there's not enough transparency in clinical research to begin with. So chance of, opening up that transparency, I think is, an opportunity that we all have to take every once in a while. So, whatever I can do to help, man, I'm here for it.
Yeah, and that's where I have been very encouraged over the last, couple of years. I do think there's a lot more, I don't know if transparency is necessarily the right word, but there's certainly more conversation and more people willing to sort of have the conversations that are,
Absolutely.
Because again, it's really easy to get into sort of finger pointing because, sites are guilty of
Yes.
a lot and CROs are guilty of a lot and everything in between, so, and, ultimately, we're all on the same side. Like we're trying to get the same thing
really
accomplished, even though it can sometimes be contentious, but never really are the two, or shouldn't be, in opposition of each other. But
exactly, we have the same goal of our patients. That's our focus, and I've been told, I shouldn't use that word patient as opposed to subjects, but I always tell them, I said, I feel like subject takes the humanity out of it. So I like to refer to our subjects as patients. And I think that, patients are where we really need to remind ourselves that why we do what we do. So something to keep in mind, I think.
That's true. I had the kind of interesting, that was a conversation I had somewhat recently, is subject versus patient versus participant. I feel like a lot of people are sort of living now in the middle ground of like participant because, and this kind of goes to a bigger potential conversation that, I mean, hell, I'd love to get your opinion on because it's something I'm very mixed about, but the whole idea of clinical research as a care option versus the idea that like we really need to maintain some distinction between a patient and a research participant because that could lead to potential ethical issues by confusing patients about the intent of clinical research. Right now, CRACO is a big sort of marketing tag. I've been guilty of saying it. I still am. You ask me, depending on what day of the week it is, I have a different opinion on whether I think we should call it a care option or if we should build a fence between care and research. I mean, from your perspective, where you're now a little more disconnected from direct patient care, does that bear any significance to you in any way?
To be perfectly honest, it shouldn't, but I think it does. I think that I've been out of the coordinating role for quite some time now. So when I was a coordinator, I think that we were instilled that research care is the same as clinical care, regardless of whatever product we're doing our studies on. Now, if I move over to the CRA and CRO world, we're very much instilled in our reports to list them as subjects, and I still get my hand slapped because I feel as though at this point, being out of the clinical setting and out of the direct patient care side, I think it's more important than ever to remind ourselves that, we're doing this job at the end of the day for a patient. We're doing clinical care, we're doing standard of care, arms on top of our research procedures. So I still think that there is a need to stay grounded and remind ourselves why we do what we do. And I think that when I think of that word patient, it really tells me that it's a person. That's all I hear is a person. Regardless of what the study is or what its indication is for, what the therapy is, doesn't matter. It's still a person at the end of the day. And we all know that our days in research get hard. And sometimes we want to quit and we want to give up, or we want to say, screw it, give it to the other coordinator, or screw it, give it to the other CRA. And I think that keeping these little victories in our head of patient versus participant or separation of research and clinical care, I think kind of keeping that semblance of normalcy is important more than ever when these studies get more and more complicated. So I've been a very big proponent for that.
Yeah, and I can certainly relate to that. I mean, it's, I've only been doing this, running sites of my own here about 5 years, but it gets challenging, man. It's hard. It's frustrating.
Absolutely.
It's chaotic. It's all of those things. But you really do take it back to, you can see people's lives be improved and changed or saved in some cases directly. And, I was always, I wonder sometimes if it depends on someone's background as to how they view. I started out in academia where I think maybe it was a little more pushed that, human subjects research is different. We're testing a generalizable knowledge. We're not treating a patient, which I still don't necessarily fully disagree with. But I also always thought that, it shouldn't be so clinical, so to speak.
I almost consider it more sterile that way, sterile.
Exactly. Yeah.
Word to use for that.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect word. It was just sort of a bad pun to be like clinical trials are too clinical, right? Like ultimately, if you're a coordinator, that, their kids' names, their pets, a lot about them, which, you may not want to do if you're trying to be completely objective as a researcher, right? Or that may be frowned upon by someone trying to be completely objective, but also you're not going to keep people in trials if you're not a human being.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the minute you start taking that humanity out of it, it's just, you're going to start having issues with, why is this coordinator just straight faced, doesn't want to speak to me unless benefiting them at this point. And so I don't know. I don't know if it's, it goes back to my paramedic experience or just my healthcare experience as a whole, that I've always been to the type that I try to keep my head and my processes in focus and remind myself at the end of the day, there's somebody at the end of this. And, I need to make sure that they're as comfortable as they can be. And that's just the way it should be, I think. And unfortunately, I think in research, we do lose sight of that on occasions. I'm guilty of it too. I think, when we have those rough days, it is hard to see the positives, and it is really hard to remind yourselves why you do what you do. So, but, currently I'm working in a lot of phase ones over the past few years, and phase one is intense and it's exhausting, to say the least. I think it's even more important then to, remind yourself, don't forget, you are doing this for potentially life-saving options here. So, just got to stay grounded.
Yeah, that's exactly what the wording I was going to use, something that helps keep you grounded. Because, it can be easy to easy to lose perspective and lose track of, why we do what we do. I want to go back through, I always tell people like there's anyone who started out at the site level or spent any significant time at the site level gets a little bit of extra credibility in my eyes, just because, I think and this probably goes for every aspect, but frankly, I think a lot of people are very disconnected from where things are happening on the ground and don't necessarily appreciate. And they can't appreciate some of the challenges that present themselves, because it's just so funny to me when I'll post things and people are like, well, just do this. I'm like, you can't just do that. It's not as easy as people make it out to be. But that aside, I'm kind of curious to know, I've never had an interest in necessarily working on the CRO side, but obviously you made that transition.
Many people can say that. Don't worry.
And a lot of people though are looking, and I don't blame anyone who wants to go from the site to, CRA. Obviously there's a lot of benefit to doing that. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit about your experience in transitioning from site to CRO and what that was like. Was it an easy transition? Did you find it more challenging or more complex than you initially thought, or just kind of walk us through what that was like for you?
When Quintiles approached me, I was working at a local cancer center as a coordinator. And I initially, when they approached, I basically was thinking in my head, I'm going to give them the middle finger because I have no desire to do this. But a colleague of mine, she basically talked me into it. And I told her, I said, if I hate this, it's going to be your fault, kind of thing. Because I think that the idea of what a CRA entailed, at least from the outside looking into it, I was terrified of it. There seemed to be so many things that you're tasked with, and the travel alone scared me at that point, because the idea of leaving, my home on a weekly basis to go somewhere brand new and, try to navigate it was terrifying to me. I was flown out to Quintiles headquarters over in Durham for, I think it was a 5-day course, a 5-day crash course in being a CRA. After you did that 5-day course, you are sent home and said, okay, here's your protocol, learn it, love it. And then in about 3 weeks, we'll send you out in the field. And that was it. It was extremely overwhelming, but I will also say that I think being a coordinator made that transition a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah.
The idea that you would want to come into this kind of job and think that you know best without that coordinating experience, you are very naive if you think that way. Because I've got project managers that I work with now, and over the past few years, I would say, that have come in, have never been a CRA even, and have skipped right into the project management role. And they have no idea some of the tasks that they're asking because they've never been in that position. The same goes for CRAs. If they've never been a coordinator, they have no idea the complicated processes that sites have to follow just to get a hold of whatever document we're requesting for maybe the third or fourth time.
Right.
So I really do believe that, that coordinating experience really set me up for success. And anybody that would tell you otherwise probably has never been a coordinator.
Well, and again, we have monitors here today. We've got 3 coming in next week. We're constantly talking to and dealing with CRAs. And I think you can tell the difference generally, even just in sort of like level of empathy. If that makes sense, that people, CRAs who've worked at the site level can have. Because to your point, like something that maybe sounds harmless or easy from the outside, even, or again, chasing down, documents or medical history or whatever the case may be, and just being like, well, why don't you have it? Like, hey man, we've requested it 5 times.
Yep.
Well, why don't you have it? What do you mean? Why don't I have it? I can't force anyone to do anything. Yeah. I mean, we're doing everything that we can, like little stuff like that, and then,
but it adds up, right? I mean, it adds up.
It does.
If it's your repeat offenders, the CRAs that do it, I think that's partially why, when I'm working with my sites, every time I'm asking for a document or, wanting to question a process that may not seem as consistent as it should be, to put it nicely, I try to give them a why behind why I'm requesting what I'm requesting, because that way it can put them at ease to know that I'm not trying to get them with something. I'm not trying to give them more work to do. It's just, I need to understand, for example, maybe I need to collect the DOA log again. And they're going to say, well, you just collected it last visit. What do you need to collect it for this time? Well, you hired a new employee between last visit and now. So yeah, I need to see it again. So I think that, again, that just kind of goes back to understanding how sites work. And the only way you can do that is to actually work at a site. I really think that sites, they get a bad rap when it comes to, if we look at things like recruiting, our recruitment numbers aren't what they should be. Why aren't the sites recruiting more? This is an easy study. It's one of those, well, you don't know it's an easy study if you haven't asked the site what the hiccups are. You can't do that. That's just not right. It's not fair.
Well, and chances are, if a study is struggling, then it's not as easy as it's thought to be.
Exactly.
I promise you, we want to enroll as many patients as possible. I can assure you we want to.
No site, well, I shouldn't say that. No sites want to do that. But most sites don't want to open a study just to say they've opened a study.
Right.
I mean, because that takes manpower, that takes money, that takes time. Nobody wants to do that. They want to enroll. They want to look good. We're all in this together kind of mentality is important. But, to go back
to your earlier point, because I think this is interesting and important too, like, because I'm mixed, like, when a CRA, let's use the word challenges or questions something at the site level, you can take it one of two ways. One is like, okay, well, this is useful for me because I have to rethink our process. Maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe you're right. And then, of course, the other side is, sometimes the CRA is trying to jam you up, because it can be seen as a sort of contentious relationship, depending on, a lot of it's just the approach or the tone of the CRA, I feel like. And probably the site, and probably the site too, because sites can come in with bad attitude.
I think that I give more credit to the sites, and I think a lot of that comes back to sites see CRAs how often. They are stuck dealing with us sometimes on a daily basis, and they probably have a bad taste in their mouth from really bad experiences. I think that it's that phrase of, it takes one attaboy to make up for 10 oh shits moments. And, that's the same thing with CRAs. It only takes, one mistake to really ruin a CRA reputation. So, yeah, I mean, it's tough, but I think that sites, we have to give them even more patience now, because there's just so many nuances to studies, and we're throwing in all this added technology, some of which is more beneficial than others, and new systems and new, websites to use for this and that and the other thing. And I can certainly see where the resentment would come into play. Definitely.
Well, a lot of it, I feel like could be very easily avoided in the beginning, with just sort of an easy level set in the beginning. Like, hey, listen, again, just being human, because I feel like we get so many, like, I don't know, they seem like AI generated reports that, depending on how you read them, they seem very like condescending sometimes. And you're like, okay, instead of, if it was CRA, it was just like, hey, listen, man, everything's cool. We're going to work together. We're going to be on the same team. Just know that, like, whenever I have an issue, I'm not trying to bust your ass. I'm just trying to make sure that, we're all good and everyone's covered. We're doing everything safely and properly. Even that alone, I feel like, can go a really long way in the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that that's kind of why because I have a routine with my sites, and it always starts in the morning. If I don't have coffee in my hand, I always tell them, all right, walk me over to get coffee so we can talk and kind of go through how things look. And honestly, just talk like human beings do. It doesn't even have to be research related. It can be, oh, how's your dad doing from surgery last time I saw you, kind of thing. Just talking with sites, you'd be surprised the kind of positive reception you'll get when you just be a decent human being.
Well, that's the same conversation we had about patients, right? I mean, again, I say this all the time, but all of this is so relationship based, like Absolutely. Whether it be between CRC and patient, whether it be between CRC and CRA, CRC and their PI, all the different pieces involved are so, again, based off of just creating good relationships. Or I think that's the difference often between success and failure. And I don't know that that's always directly appreciated as much as it should be.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah, I think we take it for granted to some degree. I think we just assume, well, he's the PI. He's going to have to suck it up. He has to deal with me, and I have to deal with him, and he doesn't have to like it. But it's like, well, I mean, you'd be surprised how much better your relationship will be if you just be nice. I mean, you'll probably get more done, honestly, because he'll probably be more receptive to talk to you if you're not being a dick to him all the time.
Right.
So, I think it speaks volumes to where we are now. It's sad though that we have to remind ourselves to just be a good human being. It's sad.
I don't think it's like a lot of other things. I don't think it's necessarily ever malicious. I mean, people are busy, they're under pressure, and, don't oftentimes maybe just stop, take a deep breath and be like, hey man, why am I doing this? Like, let's be cool. Yeah. Or even if you're not cool, just be human, because at least I can relate to that, like
exactly.
Instead of being sort of like, it's like people try to be professional, but it comes off just very impersonal. You know what I mean? And I feel like I've seen that. It's like, maybe not 50-50 mix. I think it's getting better, but there's still a fair amount of that where I feel like some of these CRAs that are just faceless, nameless, people who are constantly tapping you on the shoulder. And that's fine too. I mean, I get it. You don't have to be everybody's best friend, but at the same time, I think it would behoove a lot of people to just be cool, be a human being.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like I said, I think it's unfortunate though that we, especially, I'm not going to say especially, but, in research for purpose of this discussion, I think it's unfortunate that we're in a position where we even have to remind ourselves to do that sometimes. When we're talking about patients that are giving their time, their energy, their health, and putting it in our hands, I think that enough is a reason to say, you know what, I appreciate that. And I'm going to make sure I do what I can to make sure that this is as painless and as easy of a process as I can for everybody involved. So it sucks that we're in that weird mindset now that we have to remind ourselves, but we all have bad days, and I'm guilty of it too, where I've just had those days where I'm like, I just don't want to do this anymore. Yep. Cash me out. I'm done. But I'm trying not to.
It's a process. I mean, again, I had a recent experience with a CRA, and she did a monitor visit with one of my CRCs. It was remote. She sent a long follow-up letter with some things that I didn't agree with, that my CRC wasn't prepared to necessarily argue against. So I sent an email. I came off a little too hot, and I'd have a phone call and just be like, hey, sorry, I understand, like, I looked like an asshole because of the way I was sort of aggressive in arguing some of your points, but also, like, that's just me too. That's how I sometimes will be. So
follow-up letters, I despise when CRAs will send them, and then it's stuff that the site's like, why the hell didn't you bring this up during the visit?
Yeah, that happens a lot. Yeah,
that's a pet peeve of mine. I don't want my site to be surprised with anything that's on my report. There should be nothing on that follow-up letter that's news to them. And if it is, I haven't done my job.
Well, and I don't know that they sometimes take into account that, my PI is going to read that and he's going to be like, what the hell is all this stuff? What are you doing? You're doing a terrible job. And, that reflects bad on the CRC. And then the study is only going to be worse because it's going to put me and this PI in a weird situation. Oftentimes that'll lead to more communication breakdowns. And then it sort of spirals down from there. And then the CRC doesn't trust the CRA. The PI is questioning the CRC. And then pretty soon it's a big triangle. It's a big triangle of everyone being like, let's all just walk on eggshells here. And then nothing gets accomplished.
The easiest solution is just to send a message to the CRA's manager and say, hey, can I have a new CRA?
Well, and, it's interesting. Obviously I'm maybe more outspoken than some sites or site owner or managers, whatever you want to call it. But even I try to give everyone some grace and like benefit of the doubt. So like I've done that occasionally, but also it's like, I know they're just trying to do their jobs and they're not necessarily, I mean, again, I try to go in thinking like, okay, surely this wasn't done with malice. Like they weren't trying to throw the CRC under the bus. Maybe they're just trying to show their boss that they saw a bunch of stuff. They were doing their job and they found all this stuff. I don't know what the, intent of that is, but it's always interesting to me because I don't want to get off on a bad foot with the CRO by being, looking complainy, by being like, okay, can we get this clown out of here because they're making our lives more difficult?
Yeah, I mean, because when we send a follow-up letter, that's usually after we've had our internal reviews of the trip report. And the trip report for CRAs is usually, I would say 10 pages at least of documentation of overall how the site visit went. Obviously gets sent to the sponsor for filing and for review too. But the amount of detail that we have to put in these reports just to get a follow-up letter generated is unreal. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes that goes into those follow-up letters. But sometimes it's just a matter of maybe, for example, I collected the DOA, the staff member went on or off study, and I'm like, all right, well, this action item from last visit, this one's closed. And then it says, there's a follow-up question that you say, okay, well, I guess we don't know the answer to that based on this visit. So I have to issue a new action item or a new item for that follow-up letter that I wasn't expecting to generate. So there's all these nuances, even with these reporting styles now, that just make things even more of a nightmare to deal with.
Probably something that was intended to make things better or more clear, and unfortunately has more downstream effects that maybe weren't intended in the first place, which we're seeing a lot right now in the clinical trial space, I think, where, everyone's trying to quote unquote innovate. But, oftentimes that innovation is really sort of just kicking the can down to somebody else and making their lives worse,
Yeah, I was talking to VersaTrial a few weeks ago and just kind of going through their systems and how they're basically just trying to innovate. And and I tell you what, I was very impressed with their style of innovation. So I think that there are people out there that understand the space well enough and have talked to the right people to know where the innovation really does need to go. As opposed to people that are trying to, maybe streamline the recruitment process or, hire an outside company to just basically do the recruitment for you. And it's like that people don't need that. I don't think. I don't think that we're hiring these agencies or these third-party vendors to do recruitments. I feel like it's redundant at that point.
Yeah, it's certainly a mixed bag at the very least. What I fear in some ways, and I'm with you. VersaTrial has also put in a lot of effort in going out to sites, spending time, seeing how things actually work instead of making assumptions. And my fear is that, because I agree, I think it's a great tool. I worry that some of these solutions that are actually useful aren't sort of sexy or investable enough as to where the sort of pie in the sky, but with no actual practical application is the stuff getting a lot more attention.
Yeah, it's almost like it's not innovative enough to some degree.
Yeah, I agree.
One of those things where it's like, yeah, you can solve X, but that's it. You haven't solved for anything else except for that one little piece that may not be a big money saver to begin with because of the cost of your services. So
yeah, or they tend to be very niche and not that generalizable across broader clinical trial space. Okay, can you do visits in a van or whatever? Yeah, maybe in some very exclusive cases, but that's not really going to transfer well to 85% of trials or whatever the case may be. So again, it's very niche, but now you've taken on investors. So now you're trying to shoehorn it into everything because you got to make back 20 million that you borrowed or
you got to prove a point, basically, to prove a point that it works and it's investable.
Yeah, and we'll see. Look, I always fear I'm not against progress or thinking outside the box. I think we should, but at the same time, do it in a smart way.
Well, do your homework. That's really all it comes down to. Just do your homework. Figure out where the need really is, and if that need is quantifiable, and do your research and talk to people. I mean, VersaTrial and we had several phone calls to kind of go through, what the CRA's potential dashboard system would look like and things like that. And, it was a very beneficial conversation for both of us to understand, where they're coming from, where I'm coming from, and what I'd like to see, what they want to see, So I think that situations like that where you actually get the engagement of both sides and understand exactly where your product needs to go, that's really where it should be. But I think people are in such a rush to innovate that they're not thinking through what their innovation really is going to look like at the end of the day. So when I look at all of the ancillary or third-party vendors that research is being involved with now when it comes to, just looking at the CRO side. We've got a vendor that'll help you with travel. We've got a vendor that'll help you with the recruitment if you need it. We've got the EDC system that we're using. We've got these ePro diaries that are through this system. We've got an app that they can download on this thing. And it's like, guys, come on, let's bring it down a notch. At some point, it's just a little ridiculous.
Well, again, a coordinator may have 5, 6, 7. Some have 10, 12 studies, depending on where you're at, and you got to deal with all that, and they're all different in different configurations.
Exactly.
Across, all the different studies,
and you wonder why they get burned out. And you wonder why they get burned out. Yeah.
Well, that's again, some of that stuff is just, again, I'm with you. Like, I would rather own a lot of those processes as a site. Like, obviously, a site's not going to, have its own EDC probably, or maybe that's a different conversation about eSource, EDC, whatever the case. But like travel, like I can book an Uber, just, provide that financial support if it's necessary, and pay it in less than 120 days or whatever the case is, So again, it's not that sites are helpless, but maybe it's cheaper to work with the site rather than go hire someone who's trying to send you 50 bad leads every month.
Yeah, I mean, and screen fail rates, man, that's a conversation all to itself when you're talking about bad leads. That just kind of sparked an interest for me because screen fail rates are such a hot topic still, especially when it comes to pay.
Well, look, you're not going to talk me off of the idea that like sites just want to get paid for the amount of work they've done. Like I get it. Obviously, if I'm a sponsor, I understand. I don't want to be throwing money at a ton of screen fails, but at some point you've got to look inward. If the screen fails are that high and it's across the board, like there's a bigger problem here. And also, like, you can't score if you're not in the game. So like, we're trying to get patients in. Would you rather us not bring them in? It becomes a very catch-22.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue that I run into is when sites do have that high screen fail rate, I'm asked to, all right, we'll do quintiles. It was called a SRAP, so Site Recruitment Action Plan. And they were these god-awful documents that I had to go through with the site. But nowadays, I think they just trust that I'm just going to kind of understand what's going on internally. But, where the sponsor and the CRO are concerned, we look at those screen fail ratios and we say, okay, well, if this could have been assessed before the patient was screened, we probably wouldn't be in this position to some degree. Now, that's not all the cases, not by a long shot, but to some degree, it's like you have to remember that, yeah, you're putting in the work, but if this patient's ejection fraction was below 50%, and that's a requirement, you probably should have seen that ahead of time.
Yeah, and that's true. I think it's very situational. I mean, there are certainly things that, and we've done it too, by, not purposely, but something comes to light that you're like, oh, well, we should have seen this before. They wouldn't have qualified. But there's also a lot of prospective data that kicks people out that you just don't know till you know. We do studies that they may look great on everything. They go get a colonoscopy, but they don't have enough disease. Or, we do migraine studies and they say, yeah, I have this many every month. While they go do an e-diary for a month and they don't have enough headaches. And that may happen way more times than you want it to, but it's out of your control, like as a site. So, we're calling these people every day. Please do your diary. Please do your diary, whatever the case may be. And then they still fail. And then we get beat up about it. And we're like, hey man, I promise we did absolutely everything we could. I don't know what else there is.
Yeah, I agree. You're right. I mean, it is extremely situational with something like that. It's just,
well, do you get, so it is, do you get the impression that there's some elaborate site level conspiracy to like screen fail patients just to get paid?
No, okay. I do not. I think that I really, no, I mean, I work with a lot of academic institutions. I work with private research companies, and no matter which direction I take it, I have never once I shouldn't say that. There was one instance of time when I thought, okay, there's more to this going on internally that I'm probably seeing on paper. But that site was a hot mess anyway. But, aside from that, no. To me, there's been no instance of saying, okay, you're clearly screening just to screen. It's like, no, sites have enough shit to do as it is. They don't want to just waste their time and energy on a screen fail just to say that they screened a patient. That's not how it works. So no, there's not a big conspiracy. There's also, those people that think that there's a conspiracy with CROs, though, too. There's plenty of those out there.
It's true. It's true. And I mean, I do, again, probably the same way that, sites get wondered about. We often wonder, like, is there more benefit to being inefficient for a CRO when, there are things that are available that could be more efficient, but we don't do them.
It's so fascinating to me because when I hear you guys were talking about it. By you guys, I mean you and I think it was Dan Safera and Dan Fox were talking about CRO inefficiency. And it's always interesting to hear because there is that widespread belief that a lot of what goes on in CROs is because they can make money off of it. And, to some degree, I don't know that I completely disagree, but the problem that we run into with CROs now is that everybody is so siloed that the left doesn't really know what the right hand is doing. So for example, we've got study startup people that handle all of study startup. And then I will come in after all that is completed and start with maybe the SIV, and I don't really know what was collected during study startup because half the time it's not shared with me. So I have to then ask for it all again. And then the site gets pissed saying, I already sent this to your startup person. And I'm going to say, well, I don't know. I didn't know that. I mean, I don't know what they collected. They're not a CRA. They don't know. So there is a lot of inefficiency, but some of it goes to just siloing and systems.
I do. I agree. I'm with you. I do think a lot of it's just simple siloing. And, sometimes look, when I say these things, it's a little bit hyperbole and a little bit tongue in cheek. But, I do really believe on both ends of the spectrum, Hanlon's razor, what is it? Never ascribe to malice, which can be adequately explained by stupidity. So it's not, I don't think anyone's going out of their way to try to like screw anyone over or make it a bad process, but it's just simple. And stupidity is not really even the right word either. It's just sort of an ignorance maybe, or just a lack of doing things, being able to do it better. And a lot of that's because of the siloing or because of the legacy solutions that are in place that no one's bothered to like re-examine. And the longer those things go on, the harder they can be to change. And I completely acknowledge that.
Yeah, I mean, we're running into a lot of issues now on the CRO side. I mean, some of these CROs, man, they're getting so big that we're hiring CRAs that were never CRAs to begin with, and they basically lied about their credentials. And I really think that sometimes in situations like that, it's like that's just a snowball effect waiting to happen of problems that are just going to mount and mount until we're forced to address them, and CROs, again, it goes back to, we're not trying to do that. It's just sometimes things happen that we overlook or we maybe didn't do our due diligence to look for. So people can make mistakes. It's just the way it goes.
Well, yeah. And, if we all had that attitude, it would be a lot less contentious. It was like, hey, man, shit happens. We're all trying our best out here. Yeah. And I feel like, again, that's generally true.
I do too.
I think we all want it to be better. And I do think it's going to require some
significant
a lot
changes.
Of squeaky wheels. Yeah, a lot of squeaky wheels to make those changes. And that's all I've ever really set out, is to sort of show the oftentimes absurdity of things,
There's nothing wrong with asking difficult questions, though. I mean,
sure.
I think that's really what's going to, advance change to begin with. To understand how CROs work, you need to be able to ask them hard questions and say, why are you doing this? And the same goes with sites, unfortunately. Sometimes the CROs say, why are you doing this? Just to kind of understand and really see what we can change to make things easier. So,
and they should. Again, I think any site that has the best interests of everyone involved would welcome. I mean, you have to be able to take that criticism. And again, if you want to be better, because look, man, I don't have all the answers. I have very few of the answers. So I'm absolutely happy to hear, people's feedback and criticism. And because, again, I sort of, I'm often defending sites, but we're the worst offenders when it comes to some of this stuff. We're responsible, just as responsible, for a lot of the issues that take place because of, various reasons, but we have to take a long look at ourselves too. And I don't know that we don't always do that. It's not just defend sites at all costs, like we're guilty.
Yeah, well, we all are, and I think there's definitely room for improvement on every aspect of this now. And CROs, we definitely have our share of problems. Without question, we have our own unique round of challenges that we're trying to manage. And, with one company being acquired by another and new systems being implemented. And what was the latest one? Is Syneos got bought out by
some private equity
consortium of investors. And
we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to say the least. I'll put it nicely. So, there's just so many challenges out there right now, and we just need to be kind. We really do. We just need to be kind to each other. Just respect the fact that changes need to happen. We all know they do, but until then, we just got to do the best with what we got.
I agree. What do you, to sort of, as we get down towards the end of the hour here, let's flip a little more positive. What do you see? So first of all, being a CRA sounds terrible to me. I have respect.
Too, so don't worry.
Let me say that I have a lot of respect for CRAs. The more I think about it, the more respect I have for them. It's hard enough dealing with one messy, chaotic site. I can't imagine dealing with, some of these CRAs are dealing with dozens of sites across different studies. I know all sites operate differently. I hear horror stories from sites, but what's going right? Or what are you seeing that, is maybe encouraging? I like to focus on the site level, but it doesn't have to be.
But no, if I were to focus my attention on the sites right now, I would say the one thing for me that's going right that I just am so happy about is just the amount of attention that these sites are giving to these patients. These patients, I tell you what, when we're talking phase 1 studies, phase 1's hard enough.
Yeah.
They're busy and they're busy studies. But I just see my coordinators constantly talk to these patients, and it doesn't even have to be during work hours. It could be after hours. It could be through text. It doesn't matter. They're wanting to make sure that our patients are taken care of. And I love seeing that. I want to know that patient at the end of the day wants for nothing when it comes to this study. They should have no questions about where things are, who they need to talk to, when their next visit is without having to call 3 times to confirm. I personally love the attention that the sites are giving their patients now. Now, that's not to say it wasn't the case, when I started this almost 15 years ago. But, I feel like it's been very consistent with that. And that is something I love seeing, that no matter how challenging this research has gotten and how many advancements we may have made in the technology side, we're still reminding ourselves that there's a patient here. And they are the ones that we want to make sure are, for lack of better words, happy. And I love seeing that, because when I'm on site and I'm hearing that coordinator talk to a patient, it may not even be my study, but I'm hearing them talk to them and just saying, okay, well, here's where we are with things. We need to get this, and this scheduled. And I'll probably be calling you in a day or two to get that taken care of. Just to follow up. I love seeing that. It warms the heart, so to speak. And that's warming the heart without bourbon or anything like that. So,
bourbon helps. Bourbon helps everything. But
I'll bring it to that. Coffee. I'm drinking coffee to that.
Well, sure. We don't know what's in it, but that's fine.
I plead the fifth. So, yeah, I think that's probably the one thing for me personally that I think that's the one thing that's going right, is that our patients are still well cared for. And I really think that goes back to the sites. The sites are, front lines, making sure our patients are taken care of. And that's something we couldn't ask for better care these days. I
think you do. If you're a CRC or you're dealing with like direct patient care, you have to, you got to love it, or you're going to crash and burn, because it's very, again, I think people underestimate how many touch points there are, or that you may get a call at 11:30 at night from a patient who's got a question. And I'm a little more.
And the fact that you're willing to pick that phone call up.
Yes. Yeah.
Speaks volumes. If you were to see that and ignore it, totally understand. Nothing against you if you don't. But, if you're one of those people that says, oh gosh, I bet I know exactly why he's calling, and you actually pick up that phone at 11 o'clock at night, knowing you're not getting paid for that phone call, and you just want to make them, put your patient at ease. That's all we can ask for,
Yep.
So yeah, I would say that for me is the most positive thing that I can say is something that keeps me going, is knowing that we're doing the best for our patients.
Yep. No, I agree. And I think it'll only get better as we do.
I
We
agree.
get better with the tools that help maintain that level of humanity rather than, the stuff that tries to replace it. I think any technology that helps towards that goal, I think is going to be beneficial as we keep
Absolutely.
going.
But the idea that we've been seeing consistency with that, I that's great. I think that no matter how difficult research has gotten, we've had the same level of consistent care and attention given to our patients. Man, it doesn't get much better than that. It really doesn't.
I agree. Well, Thomas, where can people find you online?
They can find me through LinkedIn, obviously. That's probably the best source you can use to get a hold of me through direct messenger, or if you want to say something out loud about me, mean or positive, whichever. You can find me on LinkedIn or my website, petersonresearch.com. But that's really about it. I don't have a huge social media presence because I don't have a lot of time for much beyond LinkedIn or my personal website. So feel free to reach out if you've got anything you need from me. And Brad, it was a pleasure talking to you. I really love our conversation, and hopefully we can do it again soon sometime.
Yeah, I know it's a fun one. I'll make sure and post your contact info in our show notes. And feel free to come back. We do a weekly live stream, a little bit different from the sort of audio podcast. But I'll get with you after this and see if we can get something on the books. But otherwise, man, thanks so much for coming on.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.
As always, thank you so much for listening to Note to File Podcast. You can check out all of our previous episodes at notetofilepodcast.com. Also, make sure and check out our weekly live streams on LinkedIn and YouTube. Those are Tuesdays at noon Eastern. And once again, thanks to the sponsors, Inato and Aviva Site Vault. Thanks, guys.